And welcome to our sixth solid waste work group session. Again, I'm Stacy Rogers. For those who are joining and observing, I'm the Baltimore County Administrative Officer and have the pleasure of chairing the solid waste work group. Before we begin today, I would like to share with everyone a few housekeeping items regarding our meeting today. As with our other work group meetings, this meeting will be recorded. The material that we will review today was shared via email with all group members by Jennifer earlier in the week. We hope that you received the information, had an opportunity to review it. Today, our Webex Chat function will be available to our work group members. Please note that we do have time within the meetings, and we will continue to pause to have discussion. So if you have questions, we encourage you to present your questions during that time, but we will monitor the chat. If you would like, please raise your hands to be acknowledged, and you can give your questions or comment during the designated discussion period. To members of the public who are observing our meeting today, if you have questions or feedback, we kindly encourage you to please send that information to our work group email address. We will make an effort to review and respond to questions and post responses to our website as part of our meeting documentation. That website, that email address is one word, solidwasteworkgroup@baltimorecountymd.gov. Again, that is solidwasteworkgroup@baltimorecountymd.gov. Also, as we have mentioned previously, but I want to mention again today, we will host a public comment session during our March 4th meeting. That meeting, we will return to an evening session from 5 to 7 p.m. We will post a link for sign up for public comment to our Solid Waste Work Group webpage by mid-February. Please be on the lookout for the sign up link and instructions for participation on the Solid Waste Work Group web page. And last but not least, we want to remind everyone that our solid waste residential and business survey will be available through this Sunday, February 7th. We're pleased with our progress, but we encourage you, if you have not done so, to complete the survey, as your feedback is essential to our decision making. We're particularly encouraging businesses to complete the survey. You may access the survey by visiting our website and visiting baltimorecountymd.gov/waste survey. Again, that's baltimorecountymd.gov/waste survey. Jennifer will give us a little more update on the status of the survey during her remarks. Today, our discussion topic is on financing of solid waste operations. This is a very important and timely discussion, and I'm very pleased to share that we have a special guest joining us today, County Executive John Olszewski, Jr. Mr. County Executive, on behalf of the entire work group, we would like to extend our thanks and appreciation for your vision and leadership in moving the county forward in numerous ways, one of which is addressing our solid waste operations. Since November, the work group has benchmarked solid waste collection and disposal best practices with other jurisdictions, both nationally and internationally. We initiated a sub-work group to discuss residential collections and hauler compensation, and in just a little over a month, we will receive public feedback to add to the feedback from our residential and business survey. We appreciate your invitation to each of us to do this important work, and we want to say thank you. We have received lots of information thus far, and we will receive much more today. So what I would like to do now is turn the meeting over to Mr. CE for his remarks.
Thanks, Stacy, and good morning, everyone. I want to first apologize. It was my initial intention to be with you for the duration of today's meeting because I'm so interested in the work that you're doing, and obviously financing is a critical part of actually doing the innovative work. But I want to thank you, Stacy, for your leadership here in Baltimore County. Thank you again for chairing this group. I appreciate the hard work that everyone is doing. Stacy keeps me informed in her weekly one-on-one documents. I get all the PowerPoints and all of the updates. So we are keeping track of the work, and I'm very impressed with how far we've come in a short period of time. I also want to thank Councilman Patoka for his work on this work group and just recognizing the partnership that it's going to take between the executive branch and our legislative partners to get this done. Because we know the work has to get done. And so you all have done an outstanding job reviewing and coming up with recommendations about how we can think about reforming our solid waste policies and doing so that we are promoting sustainable practices and improving service delivery. So I know that together we are mapping a path forward to both reducing waste and addressing our solid waste challenges here in Baltimore County. We believe that our residents deserve and want a clean, green Baltimore County, high quality trash services, high quality recycling services, composting, bulk trash pickup. And so in doing that work, we are leaving behind a more sustainable county for future generations. And it's not just a standalone item. We are making sustainability a priority in all that we do, and it's critical to our larger efforts. It's a commitment that we know cuts across county agencies and must be reflected in all of our work. We are embedding sustainability as part of our culture, and sustainability in every sense of the word, right? Not just green and, reducing our waste, but also sustainable, and that whatever we move towards, that practice can be sustained. We hired Steve Lafferty. I know he's here. Thank you for your work, Steve, and the work that you're doing. We're developing our first greenhouse gas inventory, a countywide climate action plan. We started glass recycling again. The innovations at Eastern Sanitary with the methane capture. But we know that those challenges remain, and we know that it's going to take bold actions to address them. And we know that you have to pay for them. So we want to continue that conversation today so that we can address the fact that we've seen trash, as you all know, go from 304 tons per day to over 1,400 tons per day in county landfills. Acting with a sense of urgency to reverse the increase, reduce our waste, and have something be sustainable for the years ahead. So in addition to the work that you all are doing, we are acting locally with urgency, but we also want to make sure that you know that, again, I said it the first time I came to you, everything should be on the table. Everything has to be on the table to find a path forward. And it's time to think outside the box within the county. It's time to think regionally. That's why I'm so grateful for your work. It's why we're working with our legislative team to require MDE to analyze and propose solutions for a regional waste disposal facility. I think looking at regional collaboration, innovation is so critical. I know there's a lot of work ahead, but I think we are rounding the curve in terms of what's happening and what we can do. So thank you for, again, sharing your talent, your expertise. I know that you all will chart a sustainable path forward, and I think our future depends on it. So with that said, I look forward to your discussion, and again, apologize. I need to limit my time since we have a press conference on our vaccination efforts here. Multiple big things is what we do in Baltimore County. And fortunately, we've got folks like Stacy with the support of Savitra to help make sure that we can do all of these things together. So, before we turn to the agenda, just want to take a step back and see if there's any immediate feedback or questions that you have for me that would be helpful in terms of informing the conversation or the work that's in front of you.
I don't see anything in the chat, Mr. CE.
It's good. It means that, like, I did it perfectly and we're good and we're going to have all the solutions. It's going to pass the council unanimously. No problem.
County Executive, Izzy Patoka here. I just want to thank you for your forward thinking on this. I know this has been something that, an issue that's, it's nuts and bolts of government. You know, and you guys have heard me say this before, that solid waste is, and how we treat it, how we dispose of it. It's not sexy work, but it's necessary nuts and bolts of government. And we need to do it right. And everyone here in this Webex, in this meeting, I should say, you know, I think is committed to being part of the solution. And so I want to thank you for your forward thinking, and also thank everybody here for being committed to working together so that we can do this in a 21st century way.
Well, Councilman, thank you for that. And, you know, I want to applaud you from the word go, your first day on the council. You know, you've talked about the importance of these nuts and bolts issues of governance, and you've been willing to engage directly, not just talk about it, but actually helping us to deliver it by being part of the work group and, you know, rolling your sleeves up. You again for your leadership on this and so many other issues.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing no other comments, Mr. CE will turn it over to GBB, our consultant, who will take the meeting over and move forward. Jennifer?
Sounds good. Again, I'm going to hang for as long as I can before the press conference, but thank you all again for allowing me to stop in, and I'll listen for a while. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Great. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much. I am going to start to share the screen. Could you guys see that now? Everybody? Thumbs up. Okay. So we are appreciative to Ms. Rogers and the CE for the opening comments. And I think it's always nice to remember how we got here. I know we've been moving quickly, and appreciate everybody's focus as we come into the home stretch of the work group effort. So today we're thrilled with our presentation and guest speakers. We just have a few housekeeping items to cover. This is in terms of, we're on to our looking at our meeting notes from our meeting number 5 on January 21st, and files that were sent, which were numerous this week. Are there any comments or questions on the files that anyone wants to bring up? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Someone let me know if there is something, because then I want to move to the updates just briefly. And I'm not seeing anything in the chat either. So the online digital survey is closing on Sunday, February 7th. We've had the resident and the business survey out in 4 languages to Baltimore County residents and businesses. I'm happy to report we have far exceeded our initial goal on the residential side. We're at approximately 6,500 responses right now. And so when we're at our next meeting, which is February 18th, we're going to give the initial view of what came back in that feedback, but it's very exciting and great to have such range. And we're even going to show the distribution of where the respondents came in by zip code. So that will be something to look forward to. And on the business side, we have just at 100 responses right now, which has been a little more challenging to get. And I know that we've been working as the project management team to try to solicit more business responses through chambers and other networks. Anything else anyone wants to ask or say about the survey?
Just encourage everyone, if they know businesses, to please encourage them to participate in your circles. We have reached out to the Chambers of Commerce, Savitra, as well as our Department of Economic and Workforce Development. So we're hopeful that we'll get a few more over the weekend.
Yeah, and the link for the surveys is accessible from the Solid Waste Work Group webpage, as well as the county's front page, and also the solid waste pages. So there's a number of places you can grab that link. It's the same link we've had through. If anybody has any issues with that, let me know.
And if our work group members need us to just send it out for ready access to you in the email, Jennifer, can we do that? And then it will make it easy for you to forward to individuals that you may know of who can respond, particularly in that business.
Sure, I can do that. I could do that. I'll send an email after this with the survey link again, if people are agreeable. I'm going to open this up so I can see. Okay, and then the hauler subgroup, I wanted to just give the group an update that this report out from the hauler subgroup effort will also be at our next meeting. So it's a very lively meeting on February 18th, meeting number 7. And that effort will be presented. DeAndrea is the chair of that committee. Do you want to say anything else, DeAndrea?
No, we're excited to be able to present the feedback from the haulers at the February 18 meeting. So we've gotten some good conversation back and forth throughout the sub-hauler work group, and we will be prepared to present to the full work group on the 18th.
Okay. Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, so just a brief moment on recommendation planning as we move through our tactical plan effort. Again, this is our framework that we're working on with the center goal reflecting the CE's initiative charge to produce less waste and have a more inclusive and livable, vibrant Baltimore County. This is familiar to the group as we've developed this together, so we are continuing to use this as we move forward. These are our elements for consideration. Also should be familiar. And I wanted to bring up this as new information because also next week, next meeting on the 18th of February, we'll be moving through a prioritization of your feedback specifically on potential strategies. And I wanted to bring to you a little more detail than we've been seeing with the best practices boxes that we had been seeing on slides of best practices to consider as we're shaping up what strategies are coming forth. And we have them grouped into these 4 buckets of collection, new services programs, infrastructure disposal, and funding and contracts. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but we have pulled from the GPB background memo effort, the initial hauler subgroup feedback, the work group, your feedback through the briefing memo format we've been using. And, you know, as we said, we're in the model of flying the plane while we're building it. We're obviously still getting the public input through the survey and the future public meetings. So these items will continue to be shaped. But I wanted to give you a little more detail in the strategies and also bring in the zero waste thinking from the group. So you can see here the grouping of potential strategies that, again, you'll be getting more detail and prioritizing these during and prior to our next meeting. But we have a number of items here. This was what was sent also in the slides ahead of time. We're not going to go through each one now, but again, the ones in green are identified as zero waste strategies in particular, and we're starting to see some more shape to what the strategies are coming forth. And I'll pause to see if there's any comments or questions on this. And again, I just wanted to kind of bring the group through because we're going to be getting into more detail on each of these as we model, and also ask you for feedback in terms of if these are low, medium, and high priority, and additional items that you want to see modeled. So any comments or questions on this?
I have one, Jennifer. This is Stacey. I know it's embedded within, but I would like to make sure that we have a bulleted outlines, you know, the regulatory piece, because we know some of the pieces that we need to work on may require not only policy change, but regulatory change. And I think we need to put those in groupings so that we know what work we would have to do to initiate some of the pieces if the recommendations are accepted. And then, of course, things that need to be funded.
Right.
Because we talked about that a little in the framework, but I think it'd be good to visually see it to keep our eye on the radar.
Right. Okay. Any other initial thoughts? Yeah, Sarah, I saw your comment. We could highlight the MRF items also as green, the optical sorting and MRF storage, because you could technically be getting more material through those measures. So yeah, that could be also identified zero waste. Was there any other chat comments?
Only see Sarah's.
Okay. Okay. Well, and then again, this is an evolving grouping, but as we are getting closer to the end of our time together, we are definitely moving ahead with modeling and needing to get some getting to this point is exciting for the project. So I appreciate everybody's help. Any other waving hands? Okay. Okay. And again, I had this in, which is the sustainable materials management hierarchy that we're using as we think through strategies, trying to think at the top of the hierarchy for prevention, again, dealing with zero waste thinking as we embed that into our tactical plan. Okay, with that, this is a pause point. I know we just had a pause point. Anything else at this juncture? Okay. Okay, so we then are going to move on to our meeting number 6 briefing memo, which we sent at the beginning of this week. And I'm going to have Steve Simmons from GBB give a brief intro here as we then move into our speakers. Steve?
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, work group members. Over the past couple of meetings, we've talked a lot about different ways to do collection, how to process waste, what to do with it. And today we're going to move, as said earlier, to an equally important topic is how to pay for it. Those that may not know, Baltimore County today pays for its solid waste collections just through transfers in its general fund. And while that has served the county's needs so far, when we look out across the industry, we see other communities that do it slightly different and really have adopted what might be considered a better or best practice in the industry in setting things up as an enterprise fund or a self-sustaining fund. So we sent you in the briefing memo kind of an outline of what we're going to talk about, maybe like the course rubric for today. We gave some suggested reading materials for you to kind of prep yourself. But today we're going to hear from a couple of firms and people very actively involved in these type of systems. First, we have Raftellus. Raftellus is a company that when GBB takes on an assignment that involves rate setting or rate analysis of charges, they're a company we frequently and preferably turn to collaborate with. So we're independent companies, but we like working together a lot. And so therefore I invited Terry Boveri with Raftellus to present their work. Terry's headquartered with a company down in Florida, where most counties, if not all, it may well be all, have some type of enterprise fund to fund their operations. It's much more prevalent down in Florida. And so Terry's going to give you some background, be available to answer questions and some ideas about what does all this mean. And then secondly, we have a Baltimore County alumni, Carrie Hodson, who's down in Florida at Collier County as a director of a solid waste, and she's going to give you some of her experiences in managing a system. So we think that'll be very helpful for you also. So with that, I'm going to put myself on mute and turn it over to Terry.
Thank you, Steve. And we have actually Henrietta Locklear, who's Vice President with Raftellus, is also a speaker today. So Terry, Senior Manager with Raftellus, and Henrietta, so welcome. And just let me know when you want me to go ahead, and I'll obviously go to the next one.
Hi, Jennifer. First of all, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Okay, awesome. Thumbs up. Want to thank the working group for the opportunity to be here today and sort of share some of our expertise and knowledge. I think this is a wonderful thing the county is sort of exploring and doing, and want to also thank GBB, Jennifer, Steve, Harvey for the opportunity. We also view GBB as sort of a leader in the industry on the solid waste side, and relish the opportunity to sort of partner and move local governments in the right direction strategically where they want to go. And for today's discussion, what we're here to sort of talk about is what are the key considerations in establishing an enterprise fund? If you could forward, Jennifer. Thank you. I'll just mention that very briefly that, and Steve kind of already had done it, that, we just specialize in providing consulting services to local governments related to the enterprise fund and rate setting. And we typically
We lost audio.
Can't hear you. What happened?
You were good. Yeah, you were good, Terry, and then it just went out. And it doesn't even show that he's on mute there. I wonder when.
No.
It's, hang on, he's going to do a headset.
Nope,
Backup
it
plan
is.
B.
Gonna use his phone.
Okay. Let's see. Hold one moment. I wonder if you might have to.
Technology, you have to love it. It's the
It was
best friend
perfect.
of Emily.
It was perfect. That's shoot. Yeah. Okay. I'm saying one moment. I see a hand signal.
Okay, how about now?
Perfect.
There you go.
Back on.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. I think technology wants to test us all on a daily basis, even given all the challenges we have, so I appreciate everybody hanging with me. Jennifer, if you could just forward to the next slide. I was just gonna say that, I tend to work with a lot of local governments that sort of already have fees established, and they need consulting services in terms of what fees should they be charging, because they're looking to invest in capital investments or different types of services that they need to provide, and how are they going to fund it? And really, that's, I guess, the focus of our presentation today. So I would have been remiss if I didn't speak to our colleague Henrietta, who leads our stormwater practice, to sort of come in and discuss some of her experiences. And I want to let her introduce herself in a second here. But really why I thought that she would be great for this conversation is sort of twofold. One is she lives and breathes stormwater and public works, and she has seen a lot of conversions from the general fund to an enterprise fund. It's a lot more, I think, common on the stormwater side. We see those sort of transactions happen. And so she's a wealth of knowledge in terms of, what sort of issues you may face and sort of headwinds you may encounter as you're making this transition to an enterprise fund. So I think she has a lot of value to add to the discussion. And then the second thing is that she also leads sort of our community of practice internal to our firm on affordability issues. And I think that's a really important key consideration when we start thinking about, user fees if we haven't traditionally been charging user fees for a particular service. So with that, I don't know, Henrietta, if you're off mute, if you can join and want to introduce yourself really briefly.
Thanks, Terry. I believe, just let me know if you can't hear me. Okay. Yep, I'm a vice president with Raftellus, and I've spent most of my 15-year career developing and implementing fees for service for a non-metered service, which stormwater and solid waste share. So that can present particular challenges that are different from other services. And as Terry said, I also work on affordability issues, and I worked with your neighbor, the city of Baltimore, to implement its stormwater fee, again, a non-metered service. So also have some experience in the region with these sort of issues. So thanks, Terry. I'll let you move on to your next slide.
Yeah, Jennifer, thanks. So this is a bit of a quick overview. We won't be on this slide for very long, but what are some of the ways that we do accounting or we pay for government services? So there's the general fund, which I think everyone's pretty familiar with, where we're going to be collecting our tax revenues and we're paying for very important services related to public health, safety, and welfare, police, fire, things of that nature. Then there's the special revenue fund, where we're going to be earmarking funds, or maybe we even have a fee and we want to have a separate accounting for a specific type of services. And then we sort of encounter enterprise funds, and that's where you can think of it more like a business type transaction. Can you go to the next slide, Jennifer? Okay, so an enterprise fund is where we're looking to recover a fee for an exchange in either services or goods typically. So, a water and sewer utility, you're looking to purchase a gallon of water, let's say, or a CCF of water. In solid waste services, you're looking to purchase a service of, resource recovery, and curbside collection and other types of disposal services. Generally, the enterprise fund is a standalone accounting where we are going to have a better handle on the accounting, the budgeting, reporting, and even communications of those services. Can you go to the next slide, please? So when we're thinking about creation of an enterprise fund, we're going to encounter some challenges, but why do we want to go through that sort of those challenges? What's sort of the benefits to an enterprise fund? So before we get into sort of the key considerations, what are the reasons why we want to do this? A lot of the perceived benefits relate to the fact that typically when we're funding a service like solid waste, that a fee structure for paying for that service is viewed as more equitable because the benefit that a customer receives is typically proportional to the cost that they pay. And when we charge a fee, that produces more revenue. And that revenue, the added revenue, means that we can reduce the burden to the general fund if the general fund was the one typically covering the cost of that service. So obviously that's very advantageous if the general fund has some constraints, or alternatively, if the enterprise fund or the enterprise activity, I should say, wants to expand services or construct infrastructure, because as we all know, general funds have a limited amount of resources. And so we need to prioritize those resources. And sometimes prioritizing services that the general fund offers is expansive and can be difficult. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to plan for a sustainable future, as was mentioned earlier on kind of the call. So I think that just to touch on the point there that, an enterprise fund can assist in planning and sustainability, the idea or the concept here is that by having a dedicated fund where we can account for and be accountable to our stakeholders for the services we provide by demonstrating what the costs and the revenues are, facilitates planning. So once we have a vision of the future that we want to target, and we understand what's the roadmap for how we get there, which I think, you know, GBB is sort of helping to identify, then the question is from, you know, the financial side of things, you know, how can an enterprise fund sort of facilitate that? And I think in that planning aspect of it, it helps there. And then lastly, you know, another really important benefit is that, you know, fees are a tool that can affect behavior, can communicate the value of the service that you're providing to your stakeholders and constituents, and ultimately achieve the objectives that you set forth in your planning, as we discussed before. So recognizing all those wonderful benefits, you know, what are sort of those challenges? And, you know, the key challenge is change. You know, change requires transition, and it also requires overcoming resistance, sometimes due to misconceptions about, you know, why we're changing and where we're trying to go. There may be incomplete information out there, and there can sometimes even be fear. Some of the resources that we had shared with GBB that were circulated had an interesting case study that was presented for a transition to an enterprise fund, and there, one of the obstacles from the public was a view or perception that, you know, solid waste user fees are just another form of taxation, which again, you know, we need to emphasize and educate people that really it's a service that we're providing, and there's a value to that, and that's what, you know, essentially you're paying for. So you know, assuming that we want to endeavor and embark upon this transition to an enterprise fund for the sustainability and the planning objectives, what are sort of those key considerations? And so the graphic to the right here identifies a number of items, maybe doesn't really communicate all of what goes into it, but accounting, you know, financial accounting is a key element to this. Organizational and staffing, you know, is going to experience some changes. We can sometimes incur additional costs because we have to have maybe customer billing services if we're not using existing billing infrastructure or avenues available to the county or the entity. We need to consider about how charging a fee that wasn't a fee there before to customers, how that's going to impact them, what the affordability considerations are. We need to think about our new financial management. You know, accounting practices are a little bit different from enterprise fund accounting than general government accounting. And then I think this is a real key one, and Henrietta's, I think, going to talk a little bit more about this in greater detail, sort of communications and outreach plan. Because at the end of the day, we need to have everybody sort of aligned toward that same goal or vision that maybe you have for your community for solid waste services. But how are we going to get everybody aligned if we don't reach out to our stakeholders and everybody that has a vested interest in this change? Which then ultimately leads to where we typically engage with GBB on is more of a rate implementation plan in conjunction with this communications and outreach element. Can you run to the next slide? Okay. So one other key thing that I haven't really focused in on too much was just how this impacts, maybe the bond rating of the underlying entity or the general obligation bond rating for, the county, for example. So just a quick brief overview, county, wonderfully highest rated you can get, AAA rating. I believe, and don't hold me to this, but I believe that maybe only 2%, in the country are at that rating roughly. So in very unique situations where you have to have, for example, a broad and diverse economy, you have to have good fiscal controls and management. So I think that, you know, a AAA rating reflects very positively on your community, not only from the perspective of the residents and the businesses and the diverse economy, but also from the management and operations of the government itself. And then, you know, as far as, you know, from the rating agency's perspective, you know, they want to know, can you pay back your debt? That's really what a AAA rating or a highest rating tells you. And some of the other key considerations there that they indicated that, you know, you have the ability, the community, the ability to raise property taxes. But I do understand, I think that the income tax is sort of at the limit that it can go to. So maybe, you know, in the future, you know, the ability to increase revenues to pay for new services could be constrained somewhat, right? That's, again, getting back to some of those benefits. Establishing a new fee and a dedicated funding source for solid waste could say, sort of overcome that challenge and may make sense. So they indicated some of what the risks are to the AAA rating, and that means that if the general fund were to have a debt load that goes above 10% of personal income, that could sort of be a challenge to the rating, where they may knock it down or consider putting the county on a watch. If other post-employment benefits, so that's related to our, you know, government staff and the post-employment benefits, similar to like pensions they may receive afterwards, if those costs continue to rise and they're unchecked, they become a big liability. That could be a negative downward pressure. And falling below the cash reserve targets was another key element that related to a concern or risk for the AAA rating. Next slide, Jennifer. So I have some charts that I put together just from the 2019 CAFR. It shows that the income taxes on the leftmost chart, income taxes about 40% of the general fund revenues. Property taxes are about 50%. Public service taxes are about 9%. So I think I mentioned earlier on the last slide that, you know, the property taxes is that element that could be increased, but obviously nobody likes raising taxes. And then one element of the expenditures the general fund's responsible for, you know, is the Bureau of Solid Waste Management. And so the chart right next to it sort of gives you a breakdown of what the annual costs were in operating costs were in 2019. And so you can see that, you know, by far and large, you know, refuse collection was a major element of that cost. And the way that that's funded is really coming from the general fund revenues there. So one of the benefits of creating an enterprise fund, I think the rating agencies would concur that by creating a new fee, you reduce the burden on the general fund. You know, you're essentially increasing the revenues typically when you establish a fee, because typically an enterprise fund, if you're going to create it, has to have a fee and has to be self-supporting. The other thing is that your enterprise fund, another benefit is you're going to have separate operating and capital reserves. You're going to be able to set aside for closure and post-closure care. And, you know, setting aside for your operating capital helps you with that long-term planning goals we talked about earlier. And then lastly, you know, the enterprise fund gets back to the whole operate like a business. So it promotes sustainable funding to achieve those objectives. Next slide, please. So, you know, how do our neighbors fund solid waste? You know, how do we sort of stack up or compare? So we did like a quick little survey of a few of the entities we have on here. You know, maybe not everybody is comparable, but just kind of some neighboring folks. And we have Anne Arundel County, City of Baltimore, Carroll County, Harford County, Howard County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. And so as you can kind of see, many of them are set up as an enterprise fund. And most of them charge a fee for residential collection services. And those fees on an annual basis sort of range around $300 to $330 a year. You know, thinking back to the slide I was presenting a second ago, where we were looking at the cost to the Bureau of Solid Waste Management, if we were to take just that, the annual refuse collection costs, roughly that $47 million, and we were to divide it by, you know, the number of households in the county, about 340,000, I think that translates to, you know, an annual fee in that $50 to $100 range, so which I thought was kind of interesting. So not suggesting that that's a fee you would charge, but just a simple way to sort of think about that for some food for thought there. Next slide, please. And so I think, Henrietta, if you'd like, I'd like to maybe turn the reins over to you and see if you want to talk a little bit about this and close us off on the presentation.
Thanks, Terry. That's great. Yeah, I think the title of the slide here says it all, that, thoughtful communication is required as a part of a change like this. And, we recommend that there's both communication with customers and engagement throughout the process. It's critical to do so. It helps build community understanding about the change and how it will improve operations and benefit customers. So that idea of communicating benefit is really important. But communication is only part of the story. We also have to engage with stakeholders. As you know, you can't just tell the community what you're going to do, but also, facilitate opportunities for customers to engage in, the surveying that I've heard about that's already a part of this process is a good start. The involvement of stakeholders early and often in the process of decision making really promotes equity and fairness and yields a product that the community will more generally support, and helps reinforce the reputation of the county as engaging with its stakeholders. And so some of the steps involved are developing a plan, a platform, and engaging in a research-based and measurable way, providing for no surprises and a positive outcome when decision time comes. Next slide, Jennifer. So I'll just talk for a couple minutes about some key takeaways related to the process of changing from a general funded program to an enterprise fund or even a special revenue fund where there's a fee for service. As you all know, solid waste is close to the heart of our everyday customer, and customers really sit up and take notice when there are any changes to service. And that's equally true for when we change the way that they pay for that service. And one of the things that we find is that when a customer goes from not directly seeing what they're paying for because it's in their taxes to, experiencing a separate fee for a solid waste service, is that they not only want to understand what they're getting, but they might expect more, just simply as part of the process of having that fee in a more visible manner. So that's really something to keep in mind as you transition is the change to a fee also associated with a change in service, an improvement in service from the customer's perspective. And whether or not there is, it's really important to strongly communicate what the service is as a part of the transition so that customers aren't surprised and don't suddenly begin to expect twice a week service or whatever it is. Then the next thing I'll say is that data maintenance is an expanded obligation under a fee for service, because as Terry related, the fee is related to the customer's demand for service instead of just a function of their taxes. And so, on the tax side, this is sort of done for you, because it's ad valorem, paid through the general fund, something that the solid waste folks don't have to think about per se. How are customers receiving their specific share of the charge? And now I know that the county has experience with developing or having a fee on the tax bill, and so that's not unknown to you from the sewer side. and the water capital charge. However, there are considerations around customers who don't already have a tax bill but should be charged for solid waste and that kind of question. And so, carefully planning ahead and making sure that process of charging the fee likely on the tax bill could go smoothly and that customers receive the correct charge, both at the outset when they're going to be really, really interested to see the new fee, and also in the future whenever their need for service or service circumstances change. And then finally, I will also just point back to something that Terry mentioned, that using a fee for service can really propel the quality of service over time. It allows your financial planning to be more predictable and stable, and the general fund can have its whiles, its ups and downs, and solid waste funding can also have its ups and downs, and so that ability to plan ahead and depend on projections of revenue over the long term can really help reduce, they help reduce your reliance on variable funding or potentially variable funding, plan ahead, and improve the quality of service over time. So with that, I'll conclude, and we might be taking questions later, Jennifer, but we can certainly.
Now is good because we have time. We have time built in for questions now. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. We have something in the chat.
I have a question I'd like to ask. When you talked about the billing part of it, do jurisdictions opt to outsource that fee collection and management if that's not something that they already have in their operating environment?
For the collection and management of the fees, you mean?
Right, in order to collection and management of those fees coming in and out, because that's a pretty intense transactional operation.
That's right. Typically, I would say most often, jurisdictions have some sort of existing billing collections mechanism available to them, like the tax bill and the solid waste fee is glommed onto that, if I can use the word glommed on, or if they have a county-wide utility that sort of covers the whole service area, they might, as I say, piggyback onto that bill. In some cases, and I will point to some jurisdictions in Pennsylvania, they have outsourced their billing and collection of taxes, and along with it, some other fees. But that's a little bit less frequent. I think it's more typical to, as I say, piggyback onto an existing fee and jump onto that. Now, I think that's a good thought that maybe you're thinking ahead on, in that, making sure that you have the proper collections available to you is a good idea.
And the other question that I have, in this range that you talked about, just looking back at the envelope, the $50 to $100 range, did that take into consideration, which it probably didn't, the additional costs that would be associated with administering the fund?
No, it didn't. It was just the straight collection cost, when we did it. And, obviously there'd be other, additional costs. Once you start charging a fee, you'd also need to consider the disposal cost attributable to that as well. But yeah, so it was just, because a lot of times when you think about this transition to the enterprise fund, you may want to phase in that transition over time. You may not necessarily want to stop having the general fund contribute resources to fund operations, and you may want to have a plan of a multi-year phase into a self-sustaining fee. And the reason why you may want to do that is because it gets folks in the community sort of used to paying it, but it's not a big impact to their budget right away, because again, you're going to be changing in your community who's paying for the service and aligning that more with who's sort of receiving the service. Because the way that the cost is recovered now, some customers may not be even getting service from the county, and they're kind of paying for, you know, that service, or it may be disproportional.
Can I offer a comment?
Sure, Councilmember Patoka.
So you answered one of my questions, because the range between the costs for trash service was $297 a year to $330 a year in one of the tables that was presented, and that seems really cheap to me. That seems like a really affordable. But that, I think, in the question from Stacy, that didn't account for disposal. That was just the cost of picking up, of hauling it. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
And I'm making an assumption about the number of households you would recover that cost from, just based on some general information that GBB had shared with me. So I wouldn't put a lot of credibility to the value. It was more of just a back of the envelope figure.
Plus, you'd have to include debt service on solid waste costs, other indirect costs,
Right.
and other further things added in there, which would bring it more comparable, probably.
Matt, if I could just say something. Montgomery County's number 330 is the line item that appears on my tax bill as a solid waste user fee for all the services the county provides me: collection, processing, transfer station, drop-off centers, MRF, waste energy, transport of residue to a landfill. So that's that 330 number up at that level is for everything.
Prego, right, everything.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
Harvey, that's
Very-
the point. I wanted to expand upon my point. If that's the cost, I
Yeah.
think if we looked at this transformative, and I heard the county executive say there are no limits to the thinking on this.
Correct.
What if we looked at how we viewed our property tax bill? Right now, the only itemization is water.
Right.
And sewer and
Sewer.
just water distribution and sewer.
But we know that 51% of every tax dollar goes to education. So
Right.
we know that's an easy one. You know, if your property tax is, and the only difficulty is if I'm mixing up income tax and property tax. But if, let's say, hypothetically, that the dollar of property tax and income tax are of the same proportion. So we know that we have 49 cents on that tax dollar left to do the rest of government outside of education. So part of it is public safety. So what if we were to itemize on the tax bill, on the property tax bill, how much we spend on public safety? Then we also itemize on that trash bill what your solid, let's say you pay, let's use easy math. Let's say your property tax is $1,000. And of that $1,000, and it said on the bill to each household that 510 is for education. And now, if you don't have children in school, you still have to pay for it. So it's a service. You know, I argue that there's still a benefit to having an educated community, even if you don't have school-age children. So then you also have a certain amount for public safety. You have a certain amount, and this might be an enterprise fund, I think, water and sewer, which we itemize now. And then for, this basic service of having your trash picked up. We itemize that on the tax bill. And I think that may allow us to address some of the shortfalls that we've identified in a way where we can communicate it to every household that has property tax in itemizing, as you would in a grocery store. If you went to a grocery store and you got all your food and they said that'll be $110, but there was no itemization, you might be confused as to what costs what and what you're paying for. So I'm suggesting if we think out of the box similarly for these basic components, maybe the other one might be streets and roads and streets, and, these basic components. How much of that property tax dollar goes into it? And Harvey, I don't know, you said, does Montgomery County do that? An itemization of your tax bill, like a receipt from the grocery store?
Montgomery County has a line item called the solid waste fee, and they send you in your tax bill a little brochure that explains why you're charged what you're charged. If you have collection services, if you have this or you have that. So the actual fee varies depending upon where you live, because in the northern part of the county, it's open market. You don't have the county hauler. You have to get your own hauler. So there's a lower charge, like 40 to the upper county. But it's very clear. It's a line item. It's separate from the property tax, but you pay it at the same time as you pay your property tax. It's collected in the same way by the county. There isn't a separate billing function for that.
So, Ms. Rogers, it's just something I'm throwing out there to consider. It would be transformative, something we've never really done before. But I think other jurisdictions, I've seen tax bills from other jurisdictions that do have an itemization of how your tax dollar is spent. And also it fits into one of the goals of the Olszewski administration, which is to be more transparent than we've been.
Councilmember Patoka, definitely worth pursuing and exploring, and also benchmarking with jurisdictions. We have this nice list of jurisdictions that have enterprise funds, looking at how they list that to be transparent. I will say that in our work on the water sewer side, because we're doing work on that side too, many jurisdictions moved away from placing their water and sewer services on the tax bill. Now we haven't done that because clearly there's a fiscal impact in terms of revenue flow, cash flow, and everything. But it is definitely worth exploring and doing further benchmarking. But just the knowledge of basically how enterprise funds work is good for us, because this is something that the Bureau has talked about many times, but it was never considered.
Thank you.
May I ask a couple questions, Stacy, if I may? This is Steve Lafferty.
Good morning, Steve. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. From what Henrietta and Terry have said, have they seen a change? Actually, it's a multiple part question. Have the jurisdictions changed their systems of collection as they have changed the financing structure, or have they basically adopted the system that was in place? And I think part of it goes back to the comment that was made about Montgomery County and Up County not having the same level of services, but would the same system likely continue?
Hi, Steve. When you say collection, do you mean billing, or is that actual physical waste collection?
Physical waste collection.
Well, maybe Harvey or Steve wants to jump in too here, but sorry, go ahead.
Carrie, I was just going to say, to Henrietta's point in her presentation, saying that oftentimes residents, when making the change, wanted to have something in return, especially if there was an increase. So I think that is the contemplation here of, while you're making a change, to also improve service at the same time. Is that right, Henrietta?
Yep, that's exactly right. It's
Yeah,
a good,
Okay, we have that question on the survey. We do have a question that talks about changes that, how do you feel about certain changes? But then a question is about, are you willing to pay more for certain things? So we're really looking forward to getting the analysis on the survey to really look at that part.
Steve, to answer Steve's question, I've seen many jurisdictions implement an enterprise fund at the time that they decided to offer contract residential services as a means of, assuring, funding for it. The situation would have been an open market where there were several haulers providing the same service on the same street. So they closed the market, they contracted, with contractors to provide a more efficient service, and implemented an enterprise fund at the same time, sending out bills, maybe through a county or maybe separately, just depending upon, what happened, what they decided to do.
So there's no open market then, Harvey.
Right.
It's not like I can go out and contract separately for
Right.
services, and I can't say, I don't want yard waste picked up, I only
Right.
want recyclables picked up. So it really is, essentially continues
Right.
the structure that the jurisdiction has already put in place.
Montgomery County chose to leave the market open in the north where it was more, rural, and they've never closed that, but they are looking at closing that market. So they set up their fee structure to charge people for the services they got from the county. So if you live in the up county, you can either hire a hauler and pay $30-40 extra a month for the service, or take your waste to the transfer station and not use a hauler. If you're in the other areas, you get the waste collection service. Everyone gets the recycling service, the yard waste service, the curbside. Here it's dual stream, paper and containers collection, and a call up bulky service as well. Everyone gets that. It's just the trash collection is optional in the north.
It's also in Montgomery County, the yard trim pickup in the fall is optional. And it is worth pointing out that, yes, there are 4 counties, Montgomery, Anne Arundel, Howard, and Prince George's, that have a fee. And the fee in Prince George's County is $356 per year. EPA very aggressively advocated for fee systems in the actually in the late 70s, when a lot of this was very new. It has a way of shifting the burden off the tax rolls onto a dedicated account, and it does offer that option. But again, the residents will pay.
Right.
The question is if they're paying through a fee, or if they're paying through their taxes, and there will be residents who will clear their throats and say, are my taxes going down? And if you fail to anticipate that, you will run into problems.
So
Right. And as to that point, that's the part of the issue of doing this, it being perceived, and goes back, I think, to the statements about perception with respect to increased taxation as opposed to a user fee. So we have to deal with that, because when we did the changes the first year of the administration to close the deficit that we had to do a lot of education about the property tax did not go up. Baltimore County did not change the unit cost of property tax. Taxes went up because assessments went up, which is we don't control, the state controls. So that education part is definitely something, especially if it were something we attached to the tax bill.
I believe in both Montgomery County and in Prince George's, they were passed by county referendum.
Uh-huh.
90s was the early 90s, and that was the voters who approved it.
And that's something I was going to ask too, how it's implemented, referendum or legislation, or just how.
I had one other question, that the top tier of the hierarchy that you showed earlier, Jennifer, is about reduce and reuse. So if you're reducing, I mean, if you're successful and end up reducing the amount of waste that you actually have, or you're diverting it in some other way, what is the impact on the enterprise fund? Because the county, pays what the county pays, and we have our billing services through our typical, I mean, so if you're successful in doing what you say you want to do, which is reduce waste, then the collection fee or the enterprise fee theoretically would go down.
Terry wants to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say we do a lot of long-range economic financial modeling. And generally speaking, what we found when we do these studies and we're looking at, waste diversion and conservation and reduction of waste generation, it typically results in a financial benefit to the community, because oftentimes the cost that you have to incur to find in order to continue to get rid of the amount of waste that's being generated is a higher cost over the long run. So I think that there is an inherent, financial benefit in addition to environmental and other societal benefits to, and probably why that waste hierarchy kind of is the way that it is. Now, in regards to, I think, what the impact is to the enterprise fund, it can be impacted a few different ways. And so, I'm sort of arguing that in the long run, it's going to be better. In the short run, you could have additional costs because you need to build facilities or fund different services. I think that, one of the items being looked at is possibly organics collection, things like that. There's going to be some additional inherent upfront costs to do these types of things. But in the long run, the enterprise fund should be benefited because we're going to be doing things more efficiently and sustainably over the long run.
I would add that the actual reduction of what's set at the curb will be very small. Where the stuff goes will be different and still need to be processed and handled by something, which will cost money. So you still gotta, the more things you collect cost more money, and then processing it in different ways cost money. The revenues that are achieved from that processing, offset it. And as we've experienced in the last decade, the value of recyclables, went way up, came way down. They're inching back up now. And that creates, some swings, some significant swings that you've got to keep in mind as you set your rates.
I just wanted to time check. I see Sarah waving her hand too. Do you have a comment, sir?
Just that it's going to cost the same to drive a truck around on a collection route if you pick up no waste or no recyclables or a full load. And what changes is how often you have to run to the process facility.
Right.
So yes, you're always going to have certain costs that you have, regardless of how much material is processed or handled in that one stream. So to Harvey's point, yeah, the more times you slice a waste stream into pieces that you have to manage, the more costs you're probably going to have to cover in some fashion.
I know we want to get to our next speaker, but I just did want to say, Madam Chair, to your question about how it's done in referendum, Terry or Henrietta, do you want to respond to that in terms of how you would implement the enterprise fund mechanically?
So I think that Henrietta may want to speak with her experience on the stormwater fund, since I know that she's lived through it more times than I have. But my understanding, and I've seen it kind of go from special revenue fund to enterprise fund. It was done via ordinance, I believe, or resolution, and they were able to. But I don't know, the details, the political workings of that. So I want to defer to Henrietta if she has any comment.
You're shaking your head, Henrietta. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Terry's right. That's more frequently done as the approach.
The ordinance is more frequent.
Yeah. If I think sometimes for safety, it's done through a referendum, like the other counties that you described or somebody described had done back a couple decades ago. And, that can give you a little bit more certainty in the legal realm. But most frequently it's by ordinance.
We can research it further in terms of benchmarking with the jurisdictions that you referenced.
So do put a chat in. If anybody has any additional comments that you need to make right now, please wave your hand, but we have to get to our next speaker. Yeah, we're not going to have time. But if you have something you haven't said, we do have, the chat is working. So we are going, thank you so much, Henrietta and Terry, and good group discussion. And we are going to go to our next speaker, and it's a nice transition to say that Raftellus does work with Collier County on rate consultant. I want to just give Mike Beachler a few moments here to introduce our next speaker.
Jennifer, before you say that, I just want to thank our guest, Raftellus. That was very informative and answered a lot of questions that I had.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Henrietta.
Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Carrie Hodson. Carrie came to our attention here in the Bureau in 2010 as a very young solid waste engineer from another county. And we found her, she was being way underutilized. And we recognize, I'm glad to say we recognize talent when we see it, and talent is something that's very rare. And Carrie is a rare talent. She actually worked her way through engineering school working in the scale house at a landfill, where she then worked up to engineer. We were fortunate to get her back in 2010. She worked for us 9 years. And Carrie is a very, very rare mix of a professional, technical person that's technically incredibly qualified, but also has incredible common sense. And she is able to go from the boardroom talking to the highest people about the most technical things to going to the landfill and putting on her combat boots and kicking the boys' butts. And, a very rare trait indeed. And a few years ago, we were talking about the issues in solid waste and of getting cuts and funding and all of that. And we were talking ourselves about enterprise fund. And Carrie said, let me research it. So Carrie went out on her own and she started interviewing counties with enterprise funds. And the one thing about her is she has an incredible passion for her profession, which is solid waste. And an enterprise fund noticed that. And they said, boy, I wonder if we can get this person. And because they're an enterprise fund, they made her an offer she couldn't refuse. I'll let Carrie go from there.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, Carrie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, everyone, today. It's an honor to be speaking, and thank you, Mike. I really appreciate the kind words. Mike's exactly right. I went out searching for Baltimore County. I wanted to take the subsidizing that solid waste was having on the general fund and make sure that there was a way that I could bring a full package together to say, we can do this. So in my research, it ended up with me here in Collier County, where we do have enterprise funding. So I'm really excited today to talk to you about enterprise funding and some of the differences I see from moving from the funding that was in Baltimore County with the general fund and into the enterprise funding in Collier County. So Baltimore County holds a really strong place in my heart. So during my tenure under Mr. Beachler and Mr. Adams, I realized very quickly that the budget can be a really complicated process. Most of the time it was shifting the crises. And that's a lot of the reason why we're here today, is there was a crisis somewhere, and so solid waste bent their back, and now here we are saying, what can we do different and how can we overcome this? So when I was doing my budget in Baltimore County, I prioritized the operating budget by compliance, and meeting the operational needs, and I prioritized my capital budget. The driver was completely compliance. So with that, I will definitely say Baltimore County Budget Administration had a very strong understanding of the priorities that it took to operate a landfill and the importance of that. And I really appreciate the attention they gave to our equipment package, and that we were always able to have the basics, because that's really important in an operation. Most municipalities might have to fight against ambulances, fire engines, or hey, you can have a landfill compactor. You know, you're never going to win that battle. So in Baltimore County, a lot of the challenges that I was facing was, how can I go beyond this realm of just getting by? How can I increase some of the operations that we're doing with efficient and modernizing? How can I replace some of our aged infrastructure and actually lay out a plan so that I'm not saying, okay, maybe this will get by one more year. And then, you know, thinking about it well-rounded when you come to the collection services, because I knew to try and come up with this funding source, I would also have to look at the collection. So what services are we providing to our public, and how are they benefiting them? Terry had mentioned that shareholder communication is a large stake in enterprise funding. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Overall, the largest challenge was that I wanted to take initiative to improve and make recommendations, but I wasn't able to bring a finance package with that to the table. And I knew Matt Carpenter was not going to be happy if I didn't bring a finance package too. So that was what led me on my chase for enterprise funding. Enterprise funding allows you to establish initiatives and then determine the cost, where you can determine what projects you're going to execute. You can really prioritize. And that's what you see here in this slide. You have funding resiliency. You can have strategic planning for 5 to 10 years longer. You can really set those goals in place. So it's something that I really value, being able to provide the residents and operations here in Collier County. Next slide, please. So as Terry and Henrietta also mentioned, the philosophy with enterprise funding is those who benefit are those who pay. It offers an equity allotment to the funds. So, you know, I broke apart a collection service. So I think Harvey was talking about it. His includes the disposal and a bunch of other collection services. And that's what ours does here in Collier County as well. When we give that transparency to the residents on their tax bill, they see that whole number and what it's broken up. So I put in here an other for, you know, snow removal in Baltimore County might be an other that you might want to put into that. A lot of enterprise funds in Florida have started adding a recycling piece to theirs, and some of them have put a flat $50 rate in there. So, you know, you have a collection piece for your curbside services, your disposal, and we have an administrative fee, and then you might need to have an other recycling, something of that nature. But at the end of the day, this is your business model. Your goal isn't revenue like it is in a business model. Your goal is service and making sure that you can support your operations and your capital plan. So the structure allots for cost accounting, and the philosophy is that those who are paying are those who are benefiting. So, you know, as mentioned before, it's garbage. It's not sexy. It's sensitive. It's political. So a lot of what has to happen with enterprise funding is policy. So Terry had touched on this as well. Some of the challenges with any government that's opting to change their tax structure is the implementation. And how would you enable this to happen? This is where that shareholder communication is a very high value. So I'm glad to hear that you have a survey out. I think that's going to serve a lot of value. And some people might see it as a regressive tax or want to know if their tax bills are coming down. So this is where you have to say, you know, we're going to increase your levels of service so you won't really see a change. You're going to now have containers. You're now going to have a bulk waste. So these are part of the strategies and initiatives that have to be incorporated into an implementation when a government changes its tax structure. Terry and I had talked a lot. Terry is the consultant that I use here for rate studies, and we were talking a lot about this phased-in approach. And I will definitely say that it is something I highly recommend because it does allow the residents to get acclimated to the new structure. Next slide, please. So enterprise funds, while they can be viewed as aggressive, they also can provide support to the general fund. So we're no longer subsidized by the general fund. We're now adding a revenue to it, which is wonderful. In Baltimore County, that was my goal, relieving the general fund of subsidizing the solid waste needs. So when you have an enterprise fund with appropriate policy, you not only relieve the general fund of this critical service, and you add this revenue source, it helps to sustain the millage as well, which is really important. And I don't think I've heard that talked about too much, but that's something big that our budget office looks at here is, what's the millage? That's the first question everybody wants to know. So, you know, Baltimore County has an amazing bond rating, and that there's also avenues for intergovernment loans. The best example I can give of this, when I came to Collier County, I found I had an intergovernment loan for Hurricane Irma. And I found that there was a lot of interest on that loan, and that I owed the general fund over $1 million in interest alone. So for walking in and saying, oh, wow, you know, you really learn that there's different avenues that you can levy your funding. So, you know, you have to support your operations, you have to support your services and your programs and your capital. And then you also offer funds to the general fund. You had mentioned the fund being on your tax bill. I pay $1 per unit to our tax collector's office, and I also pay a tonnage fee to our property appraiser's office. And that's so that I can make sure that those assessments are on the tax bill. Next slide.
From the enterprise fund. From the enterprise fund, these fees go over to the other units.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Enterprise funds really do require policy and guidance. These lend your drivers and they allow you to forecast. Maybe you have a policy to maintain a pay-as-you-go for flexibility. Maybe your policy is to maintain bond covenants, which lends to fiscal responsibility. Maybe you have guidance to provide each household with a trash container by 2025. So whatever the policy might be, you might even find you have to establish local ordinance for trash collection. Somebody who might oppose it might say, I don't want to pay that. I'm going to go take my waste to the landfill. So we do have some local policies here. There's a few state policies as well surrounded by the enterprise funds and how they're done. But there's also some local policies that align our budget guidance and that we have to prove every year that we're compliant with. So regardless of what the policies are, you can forecast. And that's exactly what this model shows you here is what are my policies and what are my cash balances based on what I'm forecasting my tipping rates to be and my assessment. And at the end of the day, what that ends you with is no capital deferment. And, you know, you have guaranteed tons. You know that the curbside waste is going to come in. So you have a baseline somewhere of how much funding you have to support your operations, and you can take it from there. Next slide, please. So, and with that, I am happy to take any questions that anybody might have.
That's the same. First of all, thank you so much. That was very insightful. But also to ask this question, how was your enterprise fund?
What was the last word? I'm sorry.
Implemented ordinance.
Sure. So, sure. I'm not sure how it was implemented. It was here when I came, and it's been in this way for quite some time. What I will say is I heard you talking about benchmarking. I think that's really crucial and critical. And what I just did was I had originally contracted with Terry's group for a rate sufficiency study. And at the end of the day, we ended up doing an equitable balance across our tip fees and realigning those. And I'll be taking those to our board to make a recommendation to set the tip fees for 3 years. And so you really have, what I am doing is I hire a financial consultant like Rafa Tellis to help me go through those the guidance of where we need the tip fees to go. So the implementation would be a lot of benchmarking and seeing what other people are doing. And again, shareholders and that phased in approach that was discussed, that's a great way to introduce that type of mentality to the public.
Any questions?
I've got a question for Carrie.
Sure.
Carrie, I thought that was an excellent presentation. I appreciate what you gave. But you said one thing that really threw me for a loop. You said that the goal is not revenue.
Yeah.
Isn't revenue what it's all about, but putting revenue in a more sustainable and less political position? Because you got to have revenue to cover the expenses.
You can call it revenue. And I believe even on one of my slides, I had my my cash balance slide used to say revenue. So your revenue is really what your carry forward is. It's what your funds are. I have a hurricane fund. You might have a snow fund. You know, so your revenue is essentially what you're putting to the side in reserves. If you want to choose to use reserves to pay for a capital project, something that happened that you didn't forecast, that's where those revenues or reserves would come into play.
No, I think we may be dancing around words, but the bottom line, it is the residents who will pay the fee, as they should. They'll pay it in what is, I think, a more rational way, because it is a fund that is more or less insulated from politics, but still they have to pay, correct?
Correct, absolutely. And that's why the word choice is selective, because when you go to the public, they don't want you to make a revenue. You're a government organization. So you're making a resiliency fund. And that's why I use resiliency and reserves.
Fair enough, but after all my years in the solid waste business, I'm very suspicious of some of the word changes we use sometimes. I think you just need to be level and upfront with people.
Well, and I think Sarah just put a chat comment in saying,
one other thought I'd have very quickly, though, it would have to be, how do you deal with unanticipated expenses and impacts such as the pandemic? And how do you deal with new significant capital projects, whether it's a new recycling facility, a new yard waste, anaerobic digestion facility, or what have you? How do you put that into the fee system?
You can do it as there's several different mechanisms. That's when I would recommend that if you have a large project like that, you sit down with your budget office as well as your budget experts within your enterprise fund, and you sit down with the financial team expert. You have a consulting firm and you play out different scenarios. You might find that there is a certain percentage that you want to allot every year into a fund to support that capital infrastructure. You might find, as right now, the bond market is amazing and it's a good time to invest in that. So you decide to do that, and then you set up a rate structure to pay that back over some course of time. Then you've allotted responsibility and accountability for your payback and your bond covenants.
Thank you.
What works for the organization.
Thank you.
I wanted to just say on Sarah's chat comment, and if you guys can hear me, that the terminology around revenue versus making a profit, which I think is what you were getting to, Carrie. The point is not that the government make profit, you make reserve funds and capital funds, but not profit. That
absolutely.
Yeah, major difference with enterprise. The number of reserve funds that are set aside, an O&M reserve fund, an equipment replacement reserve fund, you know, and if they're set large enough, they can absorb, you know, extraneous costs like a storm, you know, a storm hitting, a hurricane hitting, you know, perhaps, maybe not all of it, but at least get you, you know, into responding to the operation while you chase FEMA money, so you can, you know, do things and not, you know, not strap the general fund with that. And it takes a while to build up those funds. You can't just fund, you know, at $100 million. You can't, you know, fund 25 million all at once. or 15 million all at once. You phase it in, you build it up over 5 or 10 years.
Harvey, I'm glad you said that because that was my question about, gradually reducing burden on the general fund, but it doesn't happen overnight. You would have to still have general fund to run the operation, then gradually build up the enterprise fund. So you could do some of the capital project kind of forecasting. You got to run the operation and then have enough revenue to then do some other things.
Just the program and the services and the infrastructure cost impact is going to be a lot. And then if you layer on top of that, reasonable levels of replacement funds, funding replacement funds, it's makes it even worse, harder. So you've got to think through that. But we feel it's very important to establish in an enterprise fund. A major advantage is you establish those funds, you have them, and you use them as time goes on. But you have to build them up when you're starting from zero.
Right. So that's why the phase approach would have to be there, because you have to have some opportunity to build up funds, still covering operational costs.
Correct.
Okay.
The phase-in approach also offers a lot for the residents to adjust to that change in their tax referendum.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to bring up that Carrie and I were always frustrated about, and is a lot of people don't realize, is the Baltimore County Bureau of Solid Waste is entrepreneurial, and depending on the year in the markets, we bring anywhere from $20 to $26 million revenue into the bureau, which goes to the general fund. So while solid waste is entrepreneurial, that money, we don't get any benefit from it that could be applied if we were a enterprise fund.
Carrie, when you did your research for Mike, did you look into the legislative requirements for a system benefit charge approach in Baltimore County? Just curious.
No, I had not got that far in Baltimore County. The largest challenge, I actually went to 3 different counties when I started researching this under Mike's regime, and was really trying to wrap my head around how we tied it into collections and how we also portrayed this to our budget, and then the political side of it, and then giving them that full package so they were comfortable to move it forward to the residents. So I still getting into the legislative side on it. I didn't get there.
Actually, that's a good question, because the slide very early on that listed a service charge said that legislation is required.
Yeah, that's for a system benefit charge, Chad. And the reason for that is so that you can do the enterprise fund, but you have the ability to put that charge on a tax bill and have it also support, revenue bonds, project financing, and create a flow of money that makes the enterprise.
I get all that, but what I'm getting to, and I think Steve Lafferty could confirm or comment on this, is that would simply be a county delegation request, and as such would not be particularly controversial in Annapolis.
Fingers crossed on that, but I heard, when Montgomery County went for it, Prince George's County went for it. It wasn't that hard, but it did, it did get some attention, as I recall.
Harvey, what we can do is
recapture those items, the kind of things that we would need, whether it be a state legislative item or bond referendum. I mean, whatever we would have to do to, initiate a recommendation when it comes to legislative, regulatory piece. I feel like we need to capture that each of the recommendation areas.
Right.
I think we talked about
and that's where the lead time, you can't establish it, the next day. You've got to do some things,
Schedule.
give you the authority to do it. You might take at least a year to do what you need to do to be able to have the authority as well as plan for it, because there's a lot involved. There's a lot involved here in going to an enterprise fund. And that would be a question I'd have for Terry is, in his experience, what has he seen the lead time to put one in place in his experiences?
Yeah, I mean, in the sewer benefit fee or the solid waste benefit fee,
Yeah.
the lead time on that. Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got to look at the local requirements, but typically you have to have maybe 2 public hearings, and you have maybe a time gap between those hearings, as well as once approval is done, you have an implementation period as well. So you're talking probably minimum 3 months or longer to try to do that, but it's different, by jurisdiction and locale.
I would imagine if Harvey, you're a Maryland resident, and you said that your assessments on your tax bill, there's legislation that already exists. It would be, I guess, Baltimore County adopting that. I know in Florida, we have the statute that basically says every year we have to advertise the assessment to the public. And as Terry mentioned, the window for public comment, and then it goes before the council for approval.
Yeah.
Mr. Adams has a few questions I think would be good in the remaining time that we have.
Terry.
Excuse me. In the chat, Mr. Adams asked a few questions here.
Can you see that, Carrie? On my
screen? So the population, I was looking at Mike's numbers earlier, Mr. Adams. The population in Collier County here is about 400,000, and we have about 135,000 units. Our main method of disposal is we have 1 active landfill, and we also transfer waste about 2.5 hours one way to a regional facility landfill. The individual resident here or unit receives for $221 a year, twice a week collection of garbage. They have a toter. All of our waste collection trucks are side loaders, so it's automated. They also receive once a week collection of single stream, and they also receive once a week collection of yard materials, and they have unlimited bulk set out on recycled day. The lowest price, mind you, in South Florida, probably in Florida in general. And Terry can attest to that because he really loves great studies. One of what our strategies are that we set our tipping rates very high to offset a low assessment cost for the residents. And I'm not sure when the enterprise fund started here, but I'm going to say from what I know off the top of my head, it's been at least the 80s.
Yeah, it was in the 80s.
And I don't know if it was a change. Southwest Florida is unique in that it's still developing its history. I mean, there's literally acres of lands for sale here. So I believe up until even the 60s and 70s, it was still a Harriet homeowner operating a landfill somewhere. Still a kind of new government structure here.
Yeah, Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the late 80s or so, the state required counties to do enterprise funds for solid waste services. And they made a big push on full cost accounting and the kind of system Carrie is managing.
Yeah, and I think sort of the history behind that was sort of influenced in a lot of the environmental policies at the national level in the 70s. That sort of was a precursor for that. And then into the 80s, you saw Florida react and did some work together in the county, sort of the resource legislation that they put in place to protect the waste streams to those facilities for some of those communities.
Yeah, a lot of good systems in Florida.
Okay.
Hey, Carrie, so basically, hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Basically, apples to apples, your jurisdiction you're overseeing now is about half what Baltimore County is, roughly.
Correct.
Okay, and it's mostly landfill, any recycling centers or any kind of mix?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We do not have a MRF here in the county. We have a transfer station, and it goes to the East Coast to a MRF.
Okay.
Great. Great questions. Anybody have anything else they want to flag? Anything in the chat I don't see?
I have one. If Tellus knows in general percentage of jurisdictions nationwide that choose to do this through enterprise fund. I mean, I'm just trying to get like a broad benchmark on. I'm sure that NACO could probably tell us too, but I'm just trying to get a feel for the broad use of enterprise fund for solid waste.
Hi, Stacy. So I'm by local governments that already have enterprise funds developed. But I will say we do a lot of rate surveys for our clientele around the country, ranging from Florida to Alaska. And, you know, normally when we do these surveys, you know, if they don't have a we're looking at researching their financial statements and things like that. And so we come across whether or not they're an enterprise fund or not. And I can just say, based on that anecdotal experience, I think that the prevalence is more enterprise fund, but I think it's also regionally dependent. As Harvey or someone I think mentioned earlier on, you know, in Florida, you have a lot more enterprise funds. And I think one of the reasons why maybe Florida does have that is because there was a lot of growth that happened later on, and because of some of the legislation, obviously, that's there now. So I think that, you know, when you're setting up for how you're going to fund government and how you're going to fund these services, I think that for the benefits we sort of talked about before, there's a lot of impetus to want to try to move to that. And I think that, you know, one of the comments I think Chaz may have mentioned, you know, well, how do you fund, you know, the enterprise fund? How do you fund capital? I think one other thing that, you know, just sort of keep in mind about this, and maybe another reason why you have a lot of enterprise fund creation, is because I think when you charge a fee and you have a user fee and you're trying to communicate to the public and the stakeholders about the services that you're providing, when you need to fund capital, I think it's an easier sort of relationship to draw that rationale as to, you know, why we necessarily need to do this. And more importantly, I think it comes back to the community's values. You know, what do we value as a community? If sustainability is what we value, we want to reduce and reuse and do those types of things. How can we develop a system of not just operations, but also on cost recovery to sort of promote that? And so I think that when you get into the enterprise fund realm and you're having these discussions at budget times about how you're going to be spending your money, there's that question about, okay, well, how am I going to fund it? And then who's going to pay for it? And is it equitable? And I think that's what sort of Carrie was talking about, her experiences in Collier County, that, you know, and maybe it's not always perfect, like she mentioned, where we might have some subsidy going on, but maybe that's by design, by policy. But ultimately, it's the choice of the you know, governing body about how they want to operate their system. I think it's wonderful that when we get into this enterprise fund, that there's that discussion that happens and everybody has buy-in and we're all moving towards, you know, ultimately the goal that we want to move towards.
Mm-hmm.
Terry, could you quickly explain the difference between the enterprise fund and the special reserve or special revenue fund?
Yeah, the special revenue fund is a fund used by government when they want to earmark. They oftentimes may have a fee that they charge, but they may not be fully independent or separate. So, you know, you can sometimes have a special revenue fund that's earmarked for a specific service like solid waste, but it could be for something that isn't an enterprise fund type activity either. So it's sort of an intermediary, but the main purpose of the special revenue fund is account for the earmarked funds for a specific service or element that the government is providing or doing.
Thanks.
Okay. So we are about 7 minutes left. Any other comments? Very good discussion. We moved into the general discussion, I think, and kind of went back and forth between speakers, which is great. Anybody want to say anything else here? Okay. Well, thank you so much Carrie, for your commitment and continuation of service to the county. And I really appreciate your time. And thank you again to Terry and Henrietta. Okay.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Good luck to all.
Thank you.
Thanks for anything, call anytime.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thumbs up. Okay, so we go here to open discussion, which we've been in. And unless someone wants to say anything else before we get into next steps, anything additional in open discussion? Okay, I'm not seeing anything there. So our, steps ahead as we think about bringing our work together through the home stretch. As I mentioned, we are closing the surveys Sunday. I will send the link following this again, just directly so everyone has it. If we could circle back to, we don't have much time, Steve, on the questions, but maybe we can use our last minutes to look at that. Hang on a second, which is our briefing memo questions on this. And let me just go here to the sentiments of the group in terms of priority. And again, you're going to see this. Can't get this back up. You're going to get the ability to prioritize items in total. But we had the questions you should see here. Should Baltimore County continue with its present general fund structure, or should it move to some self-funding structure? And then next, would you recommend a high, low, medium, or high priority to that? Anybody? I know we have a few minutes, but we can take those minutes to comment on this. And again, we're asking for replies by Monday. Does anybody want to say anything now?
Well, I'll just say in general, given the discussion today, I definitely think we should explore it further, because from a long-term sustainability standpoint, and knowing that we're going to always need revenues, would have to at least initiate, and could be a recommendation, initiate the further exploration of moving to a alternative fund from the general fund. But I have a lot of questions that we would need to get that research together, write a white paper, and within the government, how we do make decisions, we present the data decision memo process. But how these are implemented is definitely of interest. Again, back to the degree of difficulty, what Mr. Adams said, how difficult it was, and what would be the best strategy of how to do it, whether it be referendum, whether it be ordinance, just how we would do it.
Okay. Any other comments on that point? Again, I can't see the screen with you guys on it now, but let's see. Here you are. I can't see the folks anymore, but any other thoughts there? Then I think on to next steps, if that's all right.
Councilmember Patoka had to leave, but just in the notes, it'll note some of the things that he said about what other considerations we'd need to add into exploration about how things could be listed on if we move in this direction, or even just looking at the tax bill structure.
Okay.
But education on the front end of this would be the biggest piece. Would really have to educate on this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then to next steps, the survey closing, briefing memo, please do email in responses by end of day Monday. We are preparing our meeting 7 materials with the goal of February 16th, which would give you 2 days, and prior to the meeting 7, which is on the 18th. And As Stacy noted at the beginning, both of the upcoming meetings are, we're moving back to the 5 to 7 timeframe. The evening, as we started, the first 2 meetings were in the evening based on scheduling. So these next 2 will also be evening. And the February 18th meeting, we covered what the items we're going to be doing on that meeting. And then March 4th, as was also noted, we're presenting the draft tactical plan recommendations, and that's also our public comment meeting.
And we will have the information on the public comment process and sign up by mid-February. So members of the community have the opportunity to sign up and understand the process.
Okay.
So please look be on the lookout on the website for that information.
Okay. And then our last slide again has the webpage and the dedicated email for the project as we've shared. I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see. There you all are. I can't see people. We're at the very end. Anything else? Pass it back to you, Stacy.
Nothing from my end.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your time, and appreciate getting through right on the dot here at noon. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye all.
Bye-bye. Thanks.